I used to think loneliness looked dramatic. Like empty apartments and midnight drinking and people sitting in the rain for no reason. Turns out it mostly looks like reheating the same coffee twice because you forgot you already made it. It looks like typing a message to someone and deleting it before the first sentence feels finished. It looks like staying too long in places that don't ask questions. For me, it was Evan's house. We'd been friends since high school, back when everything felt temporary in a comforting way. Back when bad decisions only lasted weekends. He still lived at home while finishing grad school, and somehow his place became the default landing spot for everybody. Movie nights, football games, random Tuesdays that turned into 1 a.m. conversations in the kitchen. And his mom was just there. Not in a movie way, not at first. Just there in the background, rinsing dishes while talking over her shoulder, reading on the couch with her glasses low on her nose, asking if we wanted more pizza without looking up from whatever crime documentary she had playing quietly in the living room. Her name was Claire. 46, I think. I was 24 and still pretending I had plans for my life whenever relatives asked. The first thing I noticed about her wasn't even physical. It was how calm she sounded all the time, like she'd already learned which things deserved energy and which didn't. One night Evan left to pick up beer and I stayed behind because my phone was charging in the kitchen. Claire was standing at the counter folding a dish towel slowly, staring out the dark window above the sink. "You're quiet tonight," she said. I shrugged, just tired. She glanced at me then, small smile. "You always say that when something bothering you." I remember laughing once through my nose at that, not because it was funny, because I didn't know she paid attention enough to notice patterns. The kitchen smelled like coffee even though it was almost midnight. She always made a small pot late at night and somehow never slept badly afterward. "I'm not that easy to read," I said. Claire folded the towel again, even though it was already folded. "You really are." There should have been something dangerous about the moment, some music cue, something obvious. Instead, the refrigerator hummed loudly, somebody upstairs walked across the hallway, a spoon sat untouched beside her coffee mug. Real life rarely announces itself when it changes. After that, I started noticing things accidentally. The way she tucked loose hair behind her ear when concentrating. How she always warmed her hands around mugs even when the drink was cold already. How she listened completely when people spoke, which honestly felt uncommon enough to be intimate. I hated that I noticed. I started arriving a little earlier before everyone else did. Not on purpose, probably. Sometimes Evan would still be showering and Claire would open the door wearing reading glasses and an oversized gray sweater, surprised to see me standing there pretending I hadn't checked the time 3 times in the car. "You know he's terrible at answering texts," she said once. "Yeah. You could have just come later." "I know. But I stayed anyway." She started remembering small things about me. No onions on burgers. Extra ice in drinks. That I liked old songs but never admitted it first. Tiny things, embarrassingly tiny things. One evening, while Evan argued with somebody online upstairs, Claire and I sat at the kitchen table eating leftover cake straight from the container. There was a basketball game playing softly in the next room. "You date anybody lately?" she asked casually. The question caught me off guard enough that I folded my napkin into smaller and smaller squares just to do something with my hands. "Not really." "Why not?" I stared at the frosting on my fork. "I don't know, feels easier not to." She nodded like she understood more than I said. That was the problem with her, she usually did. A silence settled between us, not awkward exactly, just careful. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She looked down at it and something in her expression changed for half a second, not sadness, more like exhaustion pretending to be patience. "You okay?" I asked. Claire locked the screen quickly. "Yeah," she said, "just life." A minute later, Evan finally came downstairs yelling about something stupid, and the moment disappeared so fast it almost felt imagined. But that night after I got home, my phone buzzed while I was brushing my teeth. A text from Claire. "Not Evan. Just. Thanks for keeping me company tonight. The house gets quiet sometimes. I stared at that text for a long time before answering. Not because it was inappropriate. That would have been easier. It was just warm, careful in a way people usually aren't unless they mean to be. I typed 3 different replies before settling on anytime. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand like it had accused me of something. After that, the texting stayed light, mostly. She'd send pictures of the lopsided pancakes Evan tried making at 2 a.m. or complain about the neighbor's dog barking every morning. I'd answer during lunch breaks at work, sitting in my car with the engine off because going back inside always felt louder than necessary. Nothing crossed a line. That was probably why it kept getting closer to 1. A week later, Evan asked me to stop by the house while he was out because a package was getting delivered. "Mom'll be there," he said, "just hang out till I get back." I almost said no too quickly. When I got there, rain tapped softly against the porch railing. Claire opened the door holding a mug with both hands. "You look freezing." "I'm fine." "You're definitely not." She disappeared into the kitchen before I could argue and came back with tea already made, like she'd expected me anyway. That bothered me more than it should have. The house was quiet except for the dryer humming somewhere down the hallway. She sat at one end of the couch while I stayed awkwardly in the armchair across from her, knees bouncing once before I forced them still. "You always do that," she said. "What?" "That nervous leg thing." I looked down immediately. "Sorry." Claire smiled into her tea. "I wasn't criticizing you." There was a pause after that. The kind where both people feel something happening and pretend not to. Rainwater slid slowly down the windows behind her. She had reading glasses on again, loose strands of hair falling near her cheek, comfortable, unguarded. Dangerously easy to be around. "So," she said quietly, "you gonna tell me why you always look sad when nobody's talking to you?" I laughed once under my breath. "That's specific." "It's accurate." I looked at my cup for a second too long. Then, before I could stop myself, I said, "I think I got used to being the person people call when they're bored, not when they actually need something." The words surprised me after they came out. Claire didn't rush to answer. She never did that thing where people immediately try fixing you so they can stop feeling uncomfortable. "That can make a person lonely," she said finally. I shrugged like it didn't matter. She watched me for a moment, thumb rubbing absent-mindedly along the side of her mug. "My ex-husband was like that," she said, "around when it was convenient, gone when things got real." I glanced up. It was the first time she'd mentioned being divorced directly. "Oh. Yeah," small smile, tired around the edges. "Turns out you can spend 20 years talking to somebody and still feel unheard." Something about the way she said it stayed with me. Not dramatic, not bitter. Just accepted. Upstairs, a pipe knocked somewhere in the wall. The dryer buzzed loudly and stopped. Claire sighed, "I should fold those before everything wrinkles." "I can help." "You really don't have to." "I know." She looked at me then for a second longer than normal. "Okay," she said softly. We stood side by side in the laundry room folding warm towels while the rain kept falling outside. Every now and then our hands reached for the same shirt or pillowcase, pulling back too fast afterward like we'd touched something fragile. At one point she held up one of Evan's old band t-shirts and laughed quietly. "He used to wear this 3 days straight in high school, thought girls wouldn't notice." I smiled. They noticed. Unfortunately. The room smelled like detergent and heat. Simple things. That was the problem. Nothing about it should have felt intimate. But when she handed me the last towel, her fingers brushed the inside of my wrist for maybe half a second. Accidental. Probably. Still, neither of us moved right away. And I don't know why that moment stayed with me so long afterward. Maybe because it felt like someone had finally noticed I was there. After that laundry room moment, things got strange in small ways. Not dramatic strange. Worse. Careful strained. Claire started taking a little longer to answer texts. Not enough to seem intentional, just enough for me to notice. Conversations that used to drift naturally into midnight suddenly stopped at 10:30 with short replies and periods at the end. "Long day. Talk later. Good night." That last smiley face somehow felt more distant than no emoji at all. I told myself it was good. Necessary probably. Because every time I walked into that house lately, I felt too aware of where she was before I even saw her. Kitchen light on. Soft music somewhere down the hallway. Her laugh from another room and my chest reacting before my brain could catch up. It was getting embarrassing. One Friday night, a bunch of us were at Evan's place watching a game none of us actually cared about. The living room smelled like takeout containers and beer. Somebody kept dropping chips into the couch cushions. Normal. That should have helped. Instead, I kept noticing Claire moving through the room carrying empty glasses, brushing hair behind her ear, smiling politely at conversations she clearly wasn't listening to. At one point she walked past the couch and asked quietly, "You want another drink?" I looked up too fast. Sure." Our eyes held for maybe 1 second longer than they should have. Enough for Evan to notice. Not enough for anyone else. At least I hope not. Later, while everyone argued over what movie to put on, Evan dropped onto the couch beside me. "You and my mom text a lot now, huh?" The question landed casually, too casually. I kept my eyes on the TV. "Sometimes." That was all he said. Still, my stomach stayed tight the rest of the night. After that, I started pulling back too. Taking longer to respond, skipping a couple hangouts, telling myself I was resetting things before they became something ugly. But loneliness has a way of making discipline feel stupid. 3 days passed without seeing her. Then Claire called me unexpectedly on a Tuesday evening. Not a text. A call. I almost didn't answer because my heart started beating hard the second her name appeared. "Hey," I said. Her voice came softer than usual. "Sorry, am I bothering you?" "No." A pause. In the background I could hear wind, traffic. "I locked myself out of the house," she said, laughing quietly at herself. "Evan's phone is dead and I didn't know who else was nearby." 20 minutes later I was sitting beside her on the front porch steps while we waited for a locksmith. Cold air, dark street, one porch light flickering down the block. She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself. "You didn't have to come this fast," she murmured. "I wasn't doing anything." That wasn't exactly true. I'd left dinner half finished on the counter. She looked at me carefully, then looked away just as fast. "That's the problem," she said quietly. I frowned. "What is?" "You make things feel," she stopped there, rubbing her hands together once. "Easy." Neither of us spoke for a while after that. A car passed slowly through the neighborhood. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked twice and went quiet again. Claire exhaled through her nose and leaned back against the porch railing. "I think maybe we should be careful," she said. There it was. Not rejection exactly. Almost worse. Because her voice sounded disappointed saying it. I stared out at the streetlights. "Yeah," I said, "probably." But neither of us moved away from the other. Our shoulders stayed almost touching. Close enough that I could feel warmth through our sleeves whenever either of us shifted. Then she laughed softly to herself. "What?" "Nothing." "Claire." She shook her head, smiling a little now. "I was just thinking," another pause, 20 years ago this wouldn't have scared me so much." I turned toward her before I could think better of it. She turned too. And suddenly we were sitting there in the cold dark staring at each other too quietly. My eyes dropped once to her mouth. Just once. But she noticed. I know she noticed because her breathing changed slightly, and for one terrible second she didn't look away either. Then headlights swept across the driveway. The locksmith. And the moment disappeared before either of us had to decide what it meant. After the locksmith night, Claire became harder to read. Not colder. Just careful in a way that made every interaction feel balanced on something thin. She still texted me sometimes. Still asked if I was coming over when Evan invited people over for dinner or games. But now there were gaps in conversations. Moments where she'd start saying something, then stop halfway through and busy herself with dishes or checking her phone. Like she kept catching herself almost meaning too much. I told myself to let it settle. Then one Thursday ruined that plan completely. I got to Evan's house earlier than usual and found him packing around the kitchen looking irritated. You okay? I asked. He grabbed his keys off the counter. Yeah, just going to pick up Lee. Who's Lee? He gave me a look. Claire's friend's daughter. Mom's trying to set us up or something. Then casually. She's here already, by the way. I don't know why that bothered me so instantly. Maybe because I'd gotten used to thinking of the house as this quiet space where Claire and I existed in the pauses between everyone else's lives. Stupid thought. Still, I walked into the living room and saw Claire sitting beside a woman around my age, laughing softly at something on her phone. Claire looked up first, and for half a second her face changed when she saw me. Not guilt exactly. Awareness. Hey, she said. The girl smiled politely. Hi. I nodded back, suddenly too conscious of where to put my hands. The whole evening felt off after that. Claire seemed distracted, I seemed worse. Every time the girl laughed at something Claire said, my stomach tightened in this ugly, embarrassing way that made me want to leave immediately. Jealousy is humiliating when you have no right to feel it. At one point, Claire brushed past me in the hallway carrying folded blankets. You okay? She asked quietly. Why does everybody keep asking me that? The sharpness in my voice surprised both of us. She looked down briefly. Sorry. That made me feel even worse. Later that night, after everyone left, I stayed behind to help clean up mostly because I didn't trust myself to drive yet. The kitchen was dim except for the light above the stove. Claire rinsed glasses silently while I wiped down the counter for way longer than necessary. Finally, she said without looking at me, you were quiet tonight. I laughed once under my breath. Yeah, guess I was. Silence again. The faucet running. Ice shifting in the sink. Then she turned it off. You can say whatever it is. I stared at the wet countertop, folding the dish towel tighter between my hands. It's nothing. Meh. That sounded unconvinced. Because it was. I looked up then. Big mistake. She was standing there tired and beautiful and patient in that dangerous way she always was, waiting without pushing. And suddenly I was exhausted from pretending this wasn't happening. You looked happy with her, I said quietly. Claire blinked once. With Lee. I shrugged, already regretting it. Forget it. No, she leaned back lightly against the counter. You don't get to say something like that and disappear afterward. I looked away toward the dark window above the sink. She's closer to your world, I guess. The second the words left my mouth, the room changed. Claire went very still. You think that's what this is? She asked softly. I swallowed hard. I don't know what this is. Neither did she apparently. Because her expression cracked slightly then, not dramatic, just worn down around the edges. You think I haven't been asking myself that every day? The honesty in her voice hit harder than I expected. I stopped folding the towel. She stepped closer slowly, like approaching something nervous enough to run. We should have stopped this earlier, she whispered. Probably. But you keep showing up. My chest tightened. You keep asking me too. That silence afterward felt enormous. Claire's eyes dropped briefly to my mouth before lifting again, her breathing uneven now, mine worse. Outside, wind rattled softly against the kitchen window. Inside, neither of us moved. Not away. Not closer. Just standing there at the edge of something irreversible. And the terrifying part was, I couldn't tell which one of us was about to cross it first. The next morning, Claire texted me first. Last night got too close to complicated. I read that message 6 times while sitting in my parked car outside work. Then once more during lunch. Then again before bed. I never figured out what response would make things less true. So I sent. Yeah, I know. After that, everything shifted sideways. Not all at once. Quietly. The way seasons change before you realize the air feels different. Claire stopped texting first. When I came over, she stayed busy, always doing something with her hands, wiping counters that were already clean, refolding blankets, checking the oven timer even when nothing was inside. And she stopped looking at me for too long. That part was the worst. Because now I noticed exactly how often she used to. A couple weeks passed like that. Enough time for me to start wondering if I'd imagined everything. Maybe loneliness had just dressed ordinary kindness up as intimacy because I needed somewhere to put my attention. Maybe she'd had one emotional moment and regretted letting me see it. That explanation should have comforted me. Instead, it made my chest hurt in this dull, embarrassing way I couldn't explain to anyone. One night, Evan invited me over again, but I made an excuse about work. Then another excuse the next weekend. Eventually, he stopped asking questions and just sent, "Alive." I answered with a thumbs up. The truth was I couldn't handle seeing her act normal. Or worse, seeing her actually be normal. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Claire called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded strange immediately. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." A pause. "You haven't been around." I laughed quietly at that, not mean, just tired. Thought maybe that was the point. Another silence. Then she sighed. "My ex-husband's coming back into town for a while." Something inside me went still. "Oh." "He wants to talk about some things, financial stuff, the house." I stared out through my apartment window at the parking lot below. Cars moving. People carrying groceries. Regular life continuing without permission. "Okay," I said finally. Claire didn't answer right away. "He's staying nearby," she added. "Evan doesn't know yet." The sentence felt loaded in ways I couldn't sort through. Jealousy hit first, then guilt for feeling it. Then confusion for even believing I had a place in this situation at all. "You don't owe me explanations," I said. "I know. But you're explaining anyway." That went quiet between us. I could hear her breathing faintly through the phone. Then very softly, "I just didn't want you hearing it from somebody else." That should have meant something comforting. Instead, it just made everything harder. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time holding my phone loosely in one hand. Part of me wanted to drive there immediately. Part of me wanted to disappear before this turned uglier. Mostly I just felt tired. A few nights later, Evan posted a picture online from dinner. Claire was sitting across from an older man with gray at his temples. Her ex, probably. She looked polite, careful, hard to read. But her smile looked familiar in the worst way. Like something worn for survival. I stared at that photo longer than I should have. Then I closed the app and put my phone face down on the table. That night I opened our text thread 3 separate times. Typed, "Are you okay?" Deleted it. Typed, "I miss talking to you." Deleted that too. The apartment felt too quiet suddenly. The clock near my kitchen kept ticking louder than normal. And for the first time in months, I realized I didn't know when I'd see her again. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. Before bed, I grabbed my keys and actually made it all the way to her street. Then sat parked half a block away staring at her porch light glowing softly through the dark. I stayed there 10 minutes. Maybe longer. But I never walked to the door. And eventually, the light inside went out anyway. 3 days after I sat outside Claire's house doing absolutely nothing, she knocked on my apartment door. No warning text. No call. Just one soft knock around 8:30 at night. I opened the door too fast, like some part of me had been expecting her anyway. Claire stood there holding her keys loosely in one hand, gray coat, hair pulled back imperfectly like she'd redone it in the car. For a second neither of us spoke. Then she looked past me into the apartment and said quietly, "You live exactly how I pictured." I glanced around at the unfolded laundry on the couch and the half-dead plant near the window. "That bad?" One side of her mouth lifted slightly, a little. That tiny smile almost undid me. I stepped aside without thinking and she came in slowly, looking around like she wasn't sure she should be there. "I can make coffee," I offered. "At 9 at night." "You do it." "That's different." "It really is." For the first time in weeks she laughed fully, small, tired, real. The sound settled something in my chest I hadn't realized was clenched. While the coffee brewed, we stood awkwardly in the kitchen pretending to study random things, my fridge magnets, the weather outside the window, anything except each other. Finally Claire spoke. "I saw your car outside my house the other night." I froze with my hand around a mug. Oh, you stayed a while. I nodded once, embarrassed suddenly. I wasn't going to bother you. I know. The machine clicked softly behind us. Done brewing. Neither of us moved to pour it. Claire leaned against the counter and folded her arms loosely, but I could tell she was nervous because she kept rubbing her thumb against her sleeve. He's not moving back in, she said quietly. I looked up. My ex. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding that possibility until it disappeared. Oh. We tried having dinner, talking normally, she shook her head once. Mostly it just reminded me how lonely I was while married. The honesty in that sat heavily between us. Outside, rain tapped faintly against the windows again, same kind as the night she locked herself out. Funny how certain weather starts feeling personal. Claire exhaled slowly. You know what scares me? I didn't answer. You make me feel young in really inconvenient ways. I looked down immediately at the counter because there was too much in her face suddenly. I'm not trying to. I know, she smiled sadly, that's why it's worse. Silence stretched. Not empty. Just honest. Then she said the thing both of us had been circling for months. I think about you too much. My throat tightened so fast I almost laughed from nerves. Claire looked terrified after saying it, not dramatic terrified, real terrified, like she'd finally set something fragile on the table and couldn't take it back. So I told the truth too. I stopped coming over because seeing you act distant hurt more than staying home. She closed her eyes briefly at that. I was trying to do the right thing. Did it work? A quiet huff of breath, almost a laugh. No. The coffee had gone untouched now. Neither of us cared. Claire stepped closer then, slowly enough that I could have moved away if I wanted to. I didn't. Her voice dropped softer. This could ruin things. I know. Evan would feel betrayed. I know. And eventually you might wake up one day and realize this was just, she gestured vaguely between us, a phase you went through. That one landed harder than the others. I shook my head immediately. But before I could answer, she looked at me in this open, exhausted way and whispered. You don't understand how hard I've tried not to need this. Need. Not romance. Not fantasy. Just this. Being seen, being waited for, being thought about. I reached for her hand carefully then. Not dramatic. Just slow enough to let her stop me. She didn't. Her fingers curled around mine almost instantly, like they were tired of resisting too. We stood there in my tiny kitchen holding hands beside untouched coffee while rain tapped softly against the glass. And after a long silence, Claire looked at me and said quietly, Okay. So I nodded once and answered the same way. Okay changed all at once after that night in my kitchen. Honestly, that probably saved us. There was no dramatic announcement, no reckless decision, no movie version of love where everybody suddenly stops caring about consequences. Real life kept happening. Bills, grocery runs, Evan complaining about his professors, rain collecting in the gutters outside Claire's house. But slowly, quietly, we started making room for each other inside ordinary days. That was the strange part. Not the intensity. The consistency. A few weeks later, I stopped by her house early one morning before work because she said her coffee maker was broken. It's making a noise like it's dying, she texted. When I got there, she opened the door wearing slippers and one of those oversized sweaters I used to pretend not to notice. You drove over here for a coffee machine, she asked. You sounded emotionally attached to it. I am emotionally attached to it. I smiled despite myself. The kitchen smelled faintly like cinnamon toast. Outside, the neighborhood was still quiet in that soft 8:47 a.m. way where everybody's either late for work or pretending they are. Claire leaned against the counter while I took apart the machine like I knew what I was doing. You have absolutely no idea how to fix that, do you? She asked. Not even a little. Thought so. Still, she stayed there beside me anyway, warming her hands around black coffee from a temporary French press she dug out of the cabinet. At some point our shoulders brushed lightly. Neither of us moved away now. That still felt new. Not exciting exactly. Just comforting in a way I hadn't realized relationships could be. Evan found out eventually. Not through some explosion. Just accumulation. People notice when two voices soften around each other. I thought he'd hate me for it. Maybe part of him did for a while. There were tense conversations, long silences, one ugly night where he asked, "When did this even start?" And I didn't have an answer that sounded innocent enough. Claire cried afterward. Not because she regretted us. Because hurting her son made her feel split in half. That was the thing nobody talks about with love that arrives inconveniently. Even the good parts cost somebody something. But time kept moving. And eventually the sharpness faded. Evan adjusted in the reluctant, exhausted way people do when they realize life is going to continue whether they approve or not. Months later, the three of us sat on the back porch together eating takeout while Claire argued with Evan about some terrible movie he liked. I remember sitting there listening to them bicker while summer air moved softly through the trees. Thinking, oh, this is what peace actually looks like. Not fireworks. Not certainty. Just nobody pretending anymore. Claire and I still moved carefully sometimes. There were moments in public where she'd hesitate before touching my arm. Moments where I'd catch her staring at me across a room like she still couldn't fully believe we'd let this happen. But there was warmth now instead of panic. One night near the beginning of winter, we ended up sitting on the front porch steps after everybody else had gone to bed. Same porch where she once locked herself out. Cold air, quiet street, her shoulder pressed lightly against mine. She handed me a cup of tea and smiled into the steam. "You know," she said softly, "I almost stopped answering your texts that first month." "Really? MHM. Why didn't you?" Claire looked out toward the streetlights for a long moment before answering. Then she laughed quietly to herself. "Because the house got less lonely when you were in it. Simple as that. No dramatic speech. No perfect ending. Just two people who found each other at the wrong time and stayed long enough for it to become the right one." And honestly, I think that's rarer. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?